An elderly woman from the woods found an abandoned baby among the trees and decided to raise him as her own. When the boy grew up, he discovered he was the heir to a distant kingdom and fell to his knees weeping. Ancestral secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever in a way no one could have imagined. A story of sacrifice, destiny, and unconditional love. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell us where you're watching from. The sun rose relentlessly over the small town of Harmony Creek, like a vengeful god who had decided to punish its inhabitants. It had been 5 months since rain had graced these lands, leaving behind a cracked and dying landscape. Esperanza Ramirez's small clapboard house stood lonely at the end of the dusty road, resisting with quiet dignity the passage of time and the fury of the elements. Esperanza paused on the porch, gazing with weary eyes at the expanse of land that had once been fertile. At 38, her face bore the marks life had carved into it, lines of worry around her amber eyes, sun-weathered skin, and that perpetual expression of determination at the corners of her lips. Her dark hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled back in a braid that fell over her right shoulder. "Mama! The well's going down again!" The voice of Mateo, her 11-year-old son, interrupted her thoughts. The boy ran towards her, kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Esperanza felt her shoulders tense. "How much is left?" she asked, though she already sensed the answer. "Less than 3 feet. And the water's murky," Mateo replied, his large dark eyes reflecting a maturity beyond his years. Mariana, barely 7, appeared behind her brother. Her dress, too large for her slight frame, was patched with scraps of different colors, forming a mosaic of necessity and creativity. In her hands she held a small tomato plant, one of the few that had survived. "Look, Mama, it's blooming," the girl said proudly, showing the tiny yellow buds that promised future fruits. Esperanza knelt before her daughter, gently stroking the plant's leaves. "She's a fighter, just like us," she murmured, contemplating that green miracle that defied all logic amidst the desolation. Life hadn't been generous to Esperanza. 2 years ago, her husband Ramon had left for the north, promising to send money and return soon. The first remittances arrived on time, accompanied by letters full of hope and plans. Then the shipments became less frequent, the letters shorter, until they ceased altogether 6 months ago. The silence weighed heavier than any news, suspending the family in a limbo of uncertainty. With the children playing near the last surviving vegetable patch, Esperanza entered the house. The worn wooden table held its secrets, a notebook where she meticulously kept accounts, old letters from Ramon, and the bank's latest notice. The word foreclosure seemed to leap from the page, stalking her like a patient predator. The property had been her parents' legacy, passed down from corn farmers who had survived other droughts, economic crises, everything rural American life could throw at them. "This land has memory," her father used to say. "It's seen hunger before, but it always gives life again." Esperanza clung to those words like a talisman. As twilight approached, while she prepared a meager soup with the last vegetables from the garden, she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Visits were rare these days. Most neighbors were too busy battling their own difficulties. The man who stepped out of the dusty car wore a suit that clashed with the rural setting. His calculated smile didn't reach his eyes as he extended his hand to Esperanza. "Mrs. Ramirez, I'm Javier Mondragon, representing North Development Group," he introduced himself in a modulated voice that attempted to project confidence. "We're acquiring properties in the area for a revolutionary agro-industrial project." Esperanza shook his hand with suspicion. The ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate with silent warnings. "I'm not interested in selling," she replied firmly, guessing the purpose of the visit before it was stated. The man didn't seem surprised. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I understand your sentimental attachment, but times are changing. This project will bring progress to the region." He extended the envelope towards her. "It's a generous offer, considering the circumstances." The way he pronounced the last word contained a veiled threat that didn't go unnoticed by Esperanza. She knew from conversations in town that several families had already sold, unable to resist the pressure of debt and drought. "I'll take your card, Mr. Mondragon, but my decision is made," she replied, refusing to accept the envelope. "This land is not for sale." When the car drove away, leaving a trail of dust, Esperanza remained motionless in the driveway. The last rays of the sun painted the horizon an intense, almost unreal orange, as if the world were silently burning. That night, after putting the children to bed, Esperanza spread an old map of the region on the table. Her fingers traced the course of the now dry river, the locations of the old communal wells, the lands that had belonged to her neighbors and now belonged to distant corporations. In the dim light of an oil lamp, she wrote a letter to her only sister, Carmen, who lived in the city. Asking for help felt like tearing a piece of her soul away, but the children needed to eat, the land needed water, and time was inexorably running out. When she finished, she went out to the porch. The night sky, clear and cruel in its beauty, unfurled a mantle of indifferent stars over the human drama unfolding beneath them. Esperanza breathed deeply, letting the cool night air cleanse her lungs and her mind. "I won't lose this land," she murmured, as a promise not only to herself but to the memory of her parents, to the future of her children, to the life that still slumbered beneath the parched surface, waiting for its moment to resurface. A shooting star streaked across the sky, tracing an ephemeral path of light. Esperanza closed her eyes and made the only wish that could save them all: rain. She didn't know then that true salvation would come in a completely unexpected form, rooted not in the water falling from the sky, but in the ancestral wisdom and collective strength that lay dormant in the heart of Harmony Creek. Morning arrived with an unusually cloudy sky that promised, at last, the possibility of rain. Esperanza woke before dawn, as she always did, with that state of alert that develops in those who live in constant struggle. She moved silently so as not to wake the children, who slept together in the only extra room of the house. While she lit the stove to prepare breakfast, a knock on the door startled her. Visits at this hour were unusual. Upon opening it, she found the wrinkled and familiar face of Doña Soledad, the town's healer, a 70-year-old woman whose wisdom was respected even by those who preferred modern medicine. "Good morning, daughter," greeted the old woman, her dark eyes shining with a vitality that belied her advanced age. In her hands, she held a small cloth bag. "Doña Soledad, come in," Esperanza replied, feeling a mix of surprise and relief at the woman's comforting presence. "What brings you so early?" The old woman sat at the table, carefully placing the bag in front of her. "Last night I dreamed of you and this land," she explained, her voice a mix of firmness and warmth. "I saw drought, but I also saw life waiting to be reborn." Esperanza poured herbal tea into 2 chipped mugs, a luxury she reserved for special occasions. "The North Development Group came yesterday," she commented, sitting opposite the old woman. "They want to buy all of Harmony Creek, plot by plot." Doña Soledad nodded gravely. "I know. Old Miguel already sold, as did the Millers and the Johnsons." She opened the bag and took out a handful of small, dark seeds. "These are special. My mother kept them, and her mother before her. Seeds that survive with little water, that remember times of drought." Esperanza looked at the seeds with a mixture of skepticism and hope. "What can a few seeds do against a corporation, Doña Soledad?" "The bank threatens foreclosure, the well is drying up." The old woman took Esperanza's hands in hers, roughened by decades of working with the earth and plants. "There's more strength in these seeds than you imagine, and more strength in you than you believe. But neither you nor the seeds can do it alone." The sound of small footsteps interrupted the conversation. Mateo and Mariana appeared in the kitchen doorway, their sleepy eyes widening in surprise at the visitor. "Doña Soledad!" Mariana exclaimed, running to hug the old woman. The girl held a special adoration for the healer who had taught her to identify medicinal plants during their walks around the town. "My little ones," the old woman smiled, stroking the girl's hair. "I was just talking to your mother about magic plants." Mateo, more reserved but equally curious, approached to examine the seeds scattered on the table. "They look like beans, but smaller," he observed. "They're much more than that," Doña Soledad replied with a knowing wink. "They're the living memory of our ancestors, who also faced difficult times." After breakfast, frugal but shared with warmth, Doña Soledad asked Esperanza to accompany her to the back lot. There the old woman carefully observed the soil, kneeling with difficulty to take a handful of earth between her gnarled fingers. "The land is tired, but not dead," she declared. "It needs to remember how to live with less water." She pointed towards the neighboring property, abandoned since its owners left for the city. "Old Man Johnson built a dew collection system before he left. It could be useful to us." Esperanza looked incredulously at the rusty remains of what appeared to be a complex of gutters and containers. It never worked well, she objected. Old Man Johnson was a dreamer. Dreamers see what others cannot imagine, the old woman replied with an enigmatic smile. Your grandfather was also a dreamer, remember? When everyone planted only corn, he experimented with multiple crops that protected each other. The mention of her grandfather evoked memories of Esperanza's childhood. Fields where corn grew alongside beans and squash, following an ancient pattern her grandfather called the sacred milpa. These were techniques that younger generations had abandoned in favor of modern methods and monocultures that now lay withered under the relentless sun. I don't have the strength or the knowledge of my grandfather, Esperanza admitted, a note of defeat in her voice. But you have something he didn't have, Doña Soledad countered. You have an entire community that is losing its way of life just like you. United, you could remember what you've forgotten. That afternoon, as Esperanza accompanied Doña Soledad back to town, they ran into Teresa Aguilar, the teacher at the small rural school. Teresa, a young woman who had returned to Harmony Creek after studying in the state capital, was carrying books and seemed worried. The school will close next month if more families leave, she announced without preamble. The district says there aren't enough students to justify the expenses. Doña Soledad looked meaningfully at Esperanza. See, it's not just your land that's at stake. At that moment, a car passed by them, kicking up a cloud of dust. Inside, Esperanza recognized Javier Mondragon accompanied by the town mayor. The expression on their faces as they inspected the properties was that of hunters assessing a sure prey. They're seeing Harmony Creek as empty land, ready to be taken, Teresa murmured, following Esperanza's gaze. But they don't understand that this place has history. It has a soul. And it has people willing to fight for it, Esperanza added, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. Back at home, Esperanza found a letter the mail carrier had left. It was a reply from Carmen, her sister, written with the urgency of someone who understands the gravity of the situation. Carmen couldn't offer money, but she promised to come that weekend with important information about North Development Group and their true intentions in the region. As she read the letter in the fading light, Esperanza felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the seed of hope sprouting within her. Perhaps, as Doña Soledad said, the solution wasn't in fighting alone, but in rediscovering the collective strength that her ancestors had known. That night, under the sky that finally released a few insufficient but symbolic drops of rain, Esperanza made a decision. She would call a meeting at her house, inviting everyone who hadn't yet sold their land. Together they would remember the old methods, the techniques their grandparents had used to survive other droughts. With the children already asleep and the soft drumming of light rain on the tin roof, Esperanza allowed herself to dream of a future where Harmony Creek not only survived, but was reborn, transformed, but true to its deep roots, as ancient and resilient as the seeds Doña Soledad had brought in her worn cloth bag. The kitchen of Esperanza's house had never housed so many people at the same time. The aroma of strong coffee mingled with the smell of damp earth coming in through the open windows, as men and women from the town settled into borrowed chairs, makeshift stools, and even the packed earth floor. Candles provided a warm light, as the town's electricity had been intermittent for weeks. Carmen, Esperanza's sister, had arrived that morning with a folder full of documents. Thinner than her sister, and with short hair framing a determined face, Carmen worked as a paralegal at a law firm in the state capital, giving her access to valuable information. North Development Group doesn't want the land for agricultural projects, Carmen explained, unfolding a map on the table. They're after the underground aquifer that runs beneath Harmony Creek. They intend to bottle the water for export. A murmur of indignation ran through the room. Old Man Thompson, an elder who still owned the plot where he was born, struck the floor with his cane. That's why the communal well is drying up. They've been doing illegal drilling on the plots they've already bought. Teresa, the teacher, who had brought several antique books from her grandfather to the meeting, nodded gravely. The region has always had cycles of drought, but never so severe. What's happening isn't just natural, Esperanza observed her neighbors, recognizing in their faces the same determination she felt growing within her. They were no longer just scattered farmers, individually fighting against relentless forces. They were now a community rediscovering its collective strength. Doña Soledad, sitting by the stove like a guardian of ancestral wisdom, spoke in a serene voice that everyone listened to with respect. Our grandparents faced worse droughts without modern technology. Let's recover that knowledge before it's lost forever. The meeting transformed into an exchange of memories and practical knowledge. Old Man Riley recalled how his father built terraces to retain moisture on slopes. Mrs. Thompson shared her mother's recipes for preserving food without refrigeration. Teresa mentioned techniques of intercropping documented in books on traditional agriculture. My grandfather kept his crops alive during the Great Drought of 1970. Joaquin Lopez, a quiet man who rarely spoke at meetings, timidly interjected. He built a system of buried clay pots that slowly released water. The children, initially bored by the adult conversation, had become active participants. Mateo took notes in a school notebook, while Mariana drew the described systems with surprising accuracy for her age. We could implement these techniques in the demonstration plot behind the school, Teresa proposed. Teach the children while we produce food for the community. At midnight, as the neighbors returned to their homes under a sky studded with bright stars, something had changed in Harmony Creek. The town that had been slowly dying seemed to have inhaled a new breath of life. Esperanza accompanied her sister to the small room that would serve as her bedroom during her stay. Carmen, always practical, placed a legal document on the nightstand. "It's a writ of protection against any attempt at foreclosure," she explained. "My boss prepared it as a personal favor. It will buy you time while we organize legal resistance." The sisters embraced in silence, sharing the weight and hope of the struggle that was just beginning. The following week passed in a feverish activity that transformed Harmony Creek. Under the technical direction of Teresa and the practical wisdom of Doña Soledad, the inhabitants implemented ancient systems with available modern materials. The school's backyard became a living laboratory, where each technique mentioned during the meeting was experimented with. Esperanza, who had always worked in silence and solitude, discovered a new facet of herself as an organizer and mediator. Her house had become an operations center where activities were planned, conflicts were resolved, and small victories were celebrated. The system of buried clay pots that Joaquin remembered from his grandfather proved to be particularly effective. The plants seemed to revive, extending their roots towards these underground reservoirs of moisture. Doña Soledad's special seeds germinated with surprising vigor, producing resistant seedlings that required minimal irrigation. One afternoon, while Esperanza supervised the installation of a dew collection system on her plot, she noticed Javier Mondragon's car parked on the main road. The man observed the activities with a disturbed expression, making notes on his cell phone. That night, gathered with the central committee they had formed, Esperanza shared her concern. "Mondragon is watching us. He won't take long to take more direct action." Carmen, who had extended her stay in town, nodded gravely. "It's time for our next phase. We need to document everything and make it public. Media pressure can be our best protection." Teresa had invited a former university classmate who worked for a digital newspaper specializing in rural and environmental issues. "He's arriving tomorrow. He'll narrate our story from within." Old Man Thompson, whose initial skepticism had transformed into a staunch commitment, proposed something audacious. "We should declare Harmony Creek a cultural and environmental conservation area. My cousin at the National Park Service can advise us." The dawn of the next day brought something that Harmony Creek hadn't seen in months, a thin layer of dew that covered every surface, sparkling like tiny diamonds under the first rays of the sun. The collection systems were working, gathering this moisture in strategically placed containers. Mariana ran barefoot through the yard, her small feet leaving prints in the damp grass. "Mama, look! The water is returning!" she shouted with the simple joy of a child who still believed in miracles. Esperanza contemplated the bright drops accumulating on the leaves of the revitalized plants, in the makeshift gutters, in the collection systems. This first dew wasn't enough to solve the crisis, but it represented something more valuable. Tangible proof that together they could change their destiny. News of Harmony Creek's resistance spread like seeds carried by the wind. The article written by Sergio Valdez, Teresa's journalist friend, had been shared thousands of times on social media. The town that's reborn with ancestral techniques showed photographs of the community garden and explained each of the innovations implemented, combining ancient knowledge with modern adaptations. North Development Group reacted with a two-pronged strategy. Publicly, they offered collaboration for sustainable development, while privately they intensified the pressure on those who still doubted. Javier Mondragon visited Esperanza again, this time with an offer that doubled the previous one, and a barely veiled warning about legal consequences of obstructing regional progress. Our corporate lawyers are preparing documentation on water rights that will affect all of Harmony Creek, he mentioned with studied casualness. It would be unfortunate if the town's children were affected by the obstinacy of a few. Esperanza maintained her composure until the man left. Only then, in the privacy of her kitchen, did she allow rage and fear to run through her like electric currents. Carmen, who had witnessed the conversation from the next room, placed a firm hand on her sister's shoulder. "He's scared," she stated confidently. "They didn't expect organized resistance. His threat about water rights confirms what we suspected. The aquifer is what they really want." That afternoon, while the committee discussed legal strategies, an unexpected visit interrupted the meeting. A middle-aged man, simply dressed but with a bearing that denoted academic authority, introduced himself as Dr. Miguel Hernandez from the National Park Service. "I read the article about your farming methods," he explained, carefully unfolding an old map on the table. "Harmony Creek sits on what was an important pre-Columbian ceremonial center dedicated to deities of water and fertility." The silence that followed this revelation was broken by Doña Soledad, whose eyes shone with recognition. "My grandmother spoke of the ancients who knew how to call the rain. She said they built underground channels that still carry water." The news spread quickly through the town, infusing new energy into the resistance. The possibility that Harmony Creek housed an archaeological treasure would completely change the legal landscape, providing federal protection against commercial developments. "We haven't invented anything new," Teresa reflected aloud. "We're just remembering what our ancestors already knew." The preliminary exploration began the next day. Using non-invasive methods, and guided by the elders' knowledge of old wells and springs, the improvised team located what appeared to be an underground channel on the northern border of Esperanza's property. The children became enthusiastic helpers, with Mateo leading a group that mapped each discovery. Mariana, with her talent for drawing, documented the findings with an accuracy that amazed even the professional archaeologist. As the careful excavation revealed the first section of a perfectly preserved stone channel, Esperanza experienced a visceral connection with those who had worked this same land centuries ago, facing perhaps similar challenges with ingenuity and collective determination. The archaeological discovery attracted the attention of national media. A television crew arrived to document both the historical findings and the town's contemporary struggle. Esperanza, initially reluctant to speak in front of the cameras, found her voice when explaining the importance of preserving not only the land, but the ancestral knowledge it contained. "This land isn't just soil and water," she expressed, her words resonating with a conviction that surprised even those who knew her well. "It's living memory, accumulated knowledge from generations who knew how to live in harmony with natural cycles that we have forgotten." The reaction of North Development Group was immediate and aggressive. Their lawyers presented documentation, questioning the authenticity of the findings and requesting an evaluation by independent experts. Simultaneously, heavy machinery began operating on the plots already acquired, carrying out drilling that threatened both the archaeological site and the region's fragile water balance. Carmen mobilized her network of legal contacts, obtaining a temporary injunction that paralyzed any construction or drilling activity within a 5-kilometer radius of the archaeological site. The legal battle was just beginning, but they had gained valuable time. One morning, while Esperanza worked in the demonstration garden with a group of women, she noticed something extraordinary. The plants were not only surviving, but thriving. The system of buried clay pots combined with the traditional milpa, where corn, beans and squash grew in protective symbiosis, was producing results superior to conventional crops from better times. "It's as if the earth remembers," Doña Soledad commented, kneeling beside her to examine the plant's vigor. "As if our hands awaken a memory sleeping in the soil itself." That afternoon, gathered at the school for the weekly assembly, the inhabitants of Harmony Creek made a historic decision. They would formalize an agricultural cooperative based on optimized traditional methods, marketing their products under the brand Living Memory of Harmony Creek. Returning home after the meeting, with the setting sun painting the sky in reddish and golden hues, Esperanza found her children planting Doña Soledad's special seeds in small pots lined up on the porch. "What are you doing?" she asked, observing the concentration with which Mateo labeled each pot while Mariana carefully watered them. "We're preparing seeds for children in other towns," Mateo explained seriously. "If it works here, it can work anywhere that has water problems." Esperanza contemplated her children, feeling a pride that expanded her heart. From the struggle to survive had been born something greater, a mission that transcended her small plot and extended to a future where ancient knowledge would serve as a seed of hope for communities facing similar challenges. The news arrived with the dawn. A group of government inspectors was heading to Harmony Creek to officially assess the archaeological findings. Their assessment would determine whether the site deserved federal protection or if North Development Group's activities could continue. Esperanza watched from her porch as the entire town mobilized with a coordination that would have been unthinkable months before. Teresa organized the schoolchildren for a display of traditional agricultural projects. Old Man Thompson and other elders prepared a tour that would highlight the historical and cultural importance of each corner of the town. Carmen reviewed folders of legal documentation with the committee members. "Do you think it will work?" Mateo asked, sitting next to his mother with a plate of freshly made beans and tortillas. Esperanza looked at her son, noticing how much he had matured during these months of struggle. His eyes reflected a mixture of hope and concern, unbefitting his 11 years. "It will work because we're fighting together," she replied, affectionately ruffling his hair, "and because what we're defending is true and valuable." The caravan of official vehicles arrived punctually at noon. In addition to the inspectors from the National Park Service, there were representatives from the Department of Water Resources and the Department of Agriculture. To everyone's surprise, a man in a dark suit got out of the last vehicle. Javier Mondragon, accompanied by 2 corporate lawyers. "They have the right to observe the inspection," Carmen explained to the indignant neighbors, "but not to interfere in the technical process." Dr. Hernandez took the lead on the tour, enthusiastically presenting the preliminary findings. The pre-Columbian hydraulic channels were not only real, but constituted an ingenious system for capturing, filtering, and distributing water that took advantage of every drop of rain and environmental moisture. "The extraordinary thing," he explained as the group observed an excavated section, "is that we are facing a design that could teach us a lot about sustainable water management in the era of climate change." The inspectors took notes and photographs, visibly impressed. One of them, a middle-aged woman with thick-rimmed glasses, knelt to examine the channel's masonry more closely. "The construction technique is definitely consistent with ancient Native American styles," she confirmed. "This could change our understanding of the extent of their cultural influence in this region." Mondragon watched with an impassive expression, occasionally consulting his phone. His lawyers whispered to each other, taking detailed notes of every comment. The next stop was the school's demonstration garden. Teresa had prepared a presentation where the children themselves explained how traditional agricultural techniques were producing surprising results with minimal water use. Mariana, overcoming her natural shyness, guided the visitors through the experimental plots, explaining with amazing precision how each system worked. "These corn plants get water from the buried clay pots. The roots know where to look," she explained, pointing to vigorous stalks that defied the surrounding drought. The inspectors exchanged approving glances, especially when they checked the productivity of these experimental methods compared to control plots cultivated with conventional techniques. The tension arrived during the final meeting at the school. Representatives from each agency presented their preliminary conclusions. The verdict was unanimous. Harmony Creek housed an archaeological site of national importance that deserved immediate protection. It was then that Mondragon requested the floor. "North Development Group recognizes the importance of cultural heritage," he began in a polished voice. "That's why we propose a solution that benefits everyone. We will preserve the archaeological site as a tourist attraction within our agro-industrial development. The inhabitants can work in our facilities or in the tourist center with competitive salaries." An indignant murmur ran through the room. Esperanza felt a mixture of anger and determination growing within her. Before she could speak, Doña Soledad slowly rose, leaning on her cane. "Young man," the old woman said in a clear voice that silenced everyone, "you speak of our land and our lives as if they were commodities. This knowledge that we are recovering is not for selling tickets to tourists. It is for surviving with dignity, for our children to have a future. Carmen seized the moment to present the legal proposal they had prepared, to declare the entire area a biocultural heritage area, a designation that would protect both the archaeological remains and the traditional agricultural practices associated with them. "We're not against development," Esperanza clarified, standing up. "We're for development that respects our history, our knowledge, and our right to determine our own future." The head inspector, after briefly consulting with her colleagues, made an unprecedented decision. She would recommend immediate provisional protection while the final file was processed. This measure would paralyze any activity by North Development Group until the case was resolved. At sunset, as the official vehicles left Harmony Creek, Mondragon approached Esperanza, who was watching from the school porch. "This isn't over," he warned with calculated coldness. "My company has resources for long legal battles. How long can you resist?" Esperanza met his gaze without flinching. "As long as necessary," she replied calmly. "This land has waited centuries for us to remember its wisdom. We can be patient." When Mondragon left, Esperanza remained contemplating the horizon where the sun was setting behind the hills. She knew the battle wasn't won. That difficult days would come, but something fundamental had changed. They were no longer fighting out of desperation, but from the certainty of defending something of immeasurable value. That night, a gentle drizzle began to fall on Harmony Creek. The rainwater harvesting systems, installed on every roof, began to fill silently. It was little water, but it represented a promise. The thirsty land would drink again, the traditional crops would prosper, and the town would continue to exist, transformed but true to its deepest roots. The first rains arrived punctually that year, as if nature finally answered the call of its guardians. They weren't torrential downpours, but moderate and constant rains that allowed the dry earth to absorb every drop. The rainwater harvesting systems worked at full capacity, storing water in underground reservoirs inspired by the pre-Columbian designs discovered. The transformation of Harmony Creek was almost miraculous for those who had known it months before. The backyards, once dusty and abandoned, now housed thriving gardens where vegetables, medicinal plants, and flowers that attracted bees and hummingbirds grew. Even the houses looked different, repainted in vibrant colors using natural dyes, adorned with murals depicting the town's history and its rebirth. Esperanza was overseeing the expansion of the irrigation system on her plot when she noticed a bus arriving in the town center. It wasn't market day or a holiday, so the visit of so many people was unusual. "They're farmers from White Rock and Oakhaven," Mateo reported, running towards her with evident enthusiasm. "They're coming to learn our techniques. Teacher Teresa put me in charge of explaining the clay pot system." The news shouldn't have surprised her. Harmony Creek's success had begun to attract attention. Sergio Valdez's original article had generated more extensive reports. A state university had sent students to document the Harmony Creek model of improved traditional agriculture. Dr. Hernandez had presented the archaeological findings at an international congress, linking them to contemporary solutions to climate change. At noon, Esperanza gazed in amazement as the visitors toured the town, photographing the water harvesting systems, taking notes on the intercropped crops, consulting Doña Soledad about the properties of medicinal plants that had been rescued from oblivion. "It's strange to see our town become a model for something," she commented to Carmen, who had returned for the weekend. "6 months ago, we were on the verge of losing everything." Carmen smiled, putting her arm around her sister's shoulders. "What's truly valuable always finds a way to survive. It just needs someone to defend it with enough tenacity." The living memory of Harmony Creek Cooperative had begun to market its first products: wildflower honey, preserves made using traditional methods, textiles dyed with natural pigments. A chain of organic stores in the state capital had signed a contract to distribute them, paying fair prices that recognized not only the quality but the history behind each product. That afternoon, during the guided tour of the now officially protected archaeological site, Esperanza noticed the presence of a young man who observed everything with analytical interest. Unlike the other visitors, he didn't take photos or ask questions. He simply meticulously recorded every detail in a notebook. "He's an environmental consultant," Teresa informed her discreetly. "He works for several companies evaluating sustainable projects. He specifically asked about you and your leadership in the resistance." Esperanza continued with her tasks, intrigued but cautious. The legal battles with North Development Group continued, and although the provisional protection remained firm, they knew the corporation wouldn't give up easily. At sunset, as the visitors prepared to leave, the young consultant finally approached Esperanza, who was organizing the distribution of seedlings and seeds that the visiting farmers would take to their communities. Mrs. Ramirez, he introduced himself with polite formality. I'm Gabriel Montes from the New Earth Foundation. We're impressed with what you've achieved here. Esperanza shook his hand, assessing him with a frank look. Thank you, but this has been a collective effort. Every person in town has contributed knowledge, work, and hope. That's precisely what interests us, Gabriel continued. Our foundation funds community regeneration projects based on traditional knowledge. We would like to offer Harmony Creek a grant to expand its model to neighboring communities. The proposal was tempting, but sparked instinctive distrust in Esperanza. Too many external promises had ended in exploitation. What would your foundation get in return? She asked directly. Gabriel smiled, apparently pleased with the question. Documentation of the process, impact studies, and the satisfaction of supporting real alternatives to extractive development. We don't ask for rights to your knowledge or ownership of your techniques. That night, gathered in an extraordinary assembly, the inhabitants debated the offer. Opinions were divided. Some saw an opportunity to secure Harmony Creek's future. Others feared losing autonomy. We should investigate this foundation further before deciding, Old Man Thompson proposed, whose distrust of outside institutions had moderated but not disappeared. I agree, Esperanza seconded. We can form a committee that thoroughly studies the proposal and presents us with conclusions in 2 weeks. The vote approved this motion, designating Esperanza, Teresa, and Joaquin Lopez as responsible for the investigation. The latter, who had evolved from a shy man to a technical pillar of the community thanks to his inherited knowledge, accepted with a nod. Returning home under a starry sky, Esperanza found Mariana drawing in the lamplight. The girl's artistic talent had developed exponentially, and now her botanical illustrations were used in the educational materials the town shared. What are you drawing, little one? She asked, sitting next to her. Esperanza contemplated the drawing, recognizing in each precise stroke the same determination that had driven her own struggle. Her daughter would not only inherit land and home, but living knowledge, a connection to her roots, and the experience of having participated in the transformation of her community. That night, as Esperanza was getting ready for bed, a letter stood out among the day's mail. She opened it with curiosity, recognizing the official seal of the National Park Service. The content left her breathless. Harmony Creek had been nominated for an international award as an example of the preservation of living biocultural heritage. Through the open window, the aroma of damp earth and flowering plants filled the room. In the distance, crickets sang, announcing more rain. Esperanza carefully put the letter under her pillow, as she had done with so many treasures throughout her life. Ramon's first letter from the north, her children's childhood drawings, Doña Soledad's recipes for medicinal plants. Harmony Creek hadn't just survived, it had rediscovered its purpose. Like the special seeds they had planted months before, ancestral knowledge had germinated, taking deep roots and extending towards the future with green shoots full of promise. The letter with Ramon's letterhead arrived as the corn began to show its first ears. Esperanza held it in her trembling hands, recognizing her husband's irregular handwriting after more than a year without news. The children watched expectantly, Mateo with a cautious expression, Mariana with eyes shining with hope. Is it from Dad? The little girl asked, reaching out to touch the envelope as if it were a magical object. Esperanza nodded, looking for a quiet place to read it. She sat under the large oak tree that shaded the backyard, now transformed into a thriving garden where ancestral techniques had created a microclimate of abundance. The letter, dated 3 weeks earlier from a border hospital, told a painful but hopeful story. Ramon had suffered a work accident that had kept him hospitalized for months, unable to communicate. Partially recovered, his first thought had been to contact his family, fearing that they thought he was dead, or worse, that they thought he had abandoned them voluntarily. I'll be back as soon as the doctors allow me to travel, he promised in the last paragraph. If I still have a home to return to, Esperanza carefully folded the letter, feeling a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. The relief of knowing that Ramon was alive and thinking of them competed with the uncertainty about how his return would fit into the new life they had built during his absence. Carmen, who continued to divide her time between the state capital and Harmony Creek, found her sister still sitting under the tree as the sun began to set. "Good news?" she asked, recognizing the signs of emotional upheaval on Esperanza's face. "Ramon is alive," she replied simply, extending the letter. "And he wants to come back." After reading it, Carmen took her sister's hands in hers. "How do you really feel?" "Confused," Esperanza admitted after a long silence. "When he left, I was a different woman, dependent and scared. The land was dying, and the future seemed like a sentence. Now you're the leader who transformed Harmony Creek," Carmen completed with evident pride. "Not just me," Esperanza corrected. "We all did it together. But yes, I've changed. And I'm worried that Ramon expects to find the same woman he left behind." The following days passed in a state of nervous anticipation. The project with the New Earth Foundation was progressing successfully. 3 neighboring communities had adopted the Harmony Creek method, and the preliminary results were promising. A team of international documentary filmmakers was touring the town, recording testimonies for a documentary about rural resilience in the face of climate change. In this context of frenetic activity came the news that Ramon had been discharged and was traveling to Harmony Creek. Esperanza prepared the house with special care, but also with the determination to maintain the spaces that had cost her so much work to build: the study where she planned community activities, the corner where Mariana drew her botanical illustrations, the area where Mateo experimented with new irrigation techniques. The committee's weekly meeting coincided with the eve of Ramon's return. Esperanza briefly considered not attending, but immediately rejected the idea. Her commitment to the community was non-negotiable, even in momentous personal moments. "There's important news," Teresa announced when everyone was gathered at the school. "North Development Group has officially withdrawn all its claims and lawsuits against our lands." A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Old Man Thompson, always skeptical, raised his voice. "Why give up now when they've spent so much on lawyers?" Gabriel Montes, who was attending as a representative of the foundation, offered the explanation. "Their board of directors has undergone significant changes after a financial scandal. The new directors are adopting a corporate strategy focused on sustainability to clean up their image. Publicly confronting a successful biocultural restoration project contradicts their new narrative." Joaquin Lopez, normally silent, added, "Media attention also influenced it. Our development model is being studied internationally. Attacking us would be a public relations disaster." The meeting continued with plans to expand the educational program and consolidate the cooperative, but Esperanza found herself distracted, gazing out the window at the night sky, where a full moon illuminated Harmony Creek's greening fields. Tomorrow, under that same moon, Ramon would return to a transformed home. The bus arrived punctually at noon. Esperanza waited in the square with the children, trying to control the nerves that churned in her stomach. Several neighbors had gathered discreetly, curious to meet the man whose absence had inadvertently catalyzed the town's transformation. When Ramon got off, leaning slightly on a cane, Esperanza instantly recognized his dark eyes and shy smile, although everything else seemed different: thinner, with premature gray hair, and a scar that crossed his right cheek. The children were momentarily paralyzed before running towards him with shouts of joy. The hug was awkward, laden with contradictory emotions, but genuine. Silently, they walked towards the house, each step taking Ramon to a reunion, not only with his family, but with a transformed community. "Everything is different," he commented, looking amazed at the thriving gardens, the water harvesting systems, the rejuvenated houses with bright colors. "It's been a year of many changes," Esperanza replied, carefully choosing her words. At home, while the children enthusiastically showed their father all the transformations, from the irrigation system to Mariana's botanical illustrations that adorned the walls, Esperanza prepared coffee. Her hands, now strong and sure, no longer trembled as she served the cups. That night, when the children finally fell asleep, exhausted from the excitement, Esperanza and Ramon sat on the porch, contemplating the moon bathing the fields where the ripe corn swayed gently in the breeze. "I didn't expect to find this," Ramon confessed, gesturing towards the transformed landscape. "When I left, everything was dying. And we almost lost everything. Esperanza replied. But we learned to remember what our grandparents knew, to value the wisdom we had forgotten. You learned, Ramon corrected gently. You achieved what I couldn't. The silence that followed contained unspoken questions about the future, about how he would fit into this new reality. Finally, Esperanza spoke with the same clarity with which she now directed community assemblies. This is your home, Ramon. It always will be. But I'm not the same woman, and this isn't the same town. I can't go back. The moon illuminated their faces as they began, with careful and honest words, the delicate process of rediscovering each other, of harvesting the ripe fruits of a relationship that, like the earth itself, needed to renew itself to continue giving life. The inauguration ceremony of the Harmony Creek Traditional Knowledge Center brought together visitors from all over the region. Under a gentle spring sun, among arches adorned with wildflowers and banners embroidered by the town's women, Esperanza watched with serene satisfaction the culmination of 2 years of collective work. The building, constructed using improved traditional techniques for greater seismic resistance and thermal efficiency, would house the library of ancestral knowledge, laboratories for agricultural experimentation, and classrooms where elders would share their knowledge with young people from nearby and distant communities. Who would have imagined this when we planted Doña Soledad's first seeds? Teresa commented, adjusting the ceremonial sash that crossed her chest as the elected director of the center. Esperanza smiled, remembering those desperate days when survival itself seemed impossible. The smallest seeds sometimes produce the largest trees. Doña Soledad, now with a more stooped back but eyes just as bright, approached, leaning on Mariana's arm. The girl, now a promising 13-year-old teenager, had developed a special bond with the old woman, absorbing botanical knowledge that she complemented with formal distance learning studies in biology. The circle is complete, the old woman observed, pointing towards the horizon where new irrigation channels inspired by pre-Columbian designs but optimized with modern knowledge drew harmonious patterns across the landscape. The old nourishes the new honors the old. Mateo, at 16, confidently led the team of young people who showed visitors the experimental gardens. His passion for agricultural engineering had made him a respected innovator, even among veteran farmers, combining traditional knowledge with modern scientific principles. Ramon observed everything from a prudent distance, holding a loom where he worked on a complex geometric design with skilled hands. After months of physical recovery and emotional adaptation, he had found his place in the new family and community dynamic. His skills as a craftsman, perfected during his convalescence, perfectly complemented the diversified economy that Harmony Creek had developed. The reunion hadn't been easy. There were difficult conversations, moments of misunderstanding and adjustment. Esperanza and Ramon had needed to rediscover each other, learning to respect the ways in which both had changed during the separation. With patience and honesty, they had built a new, more equitable and conscious relationship, based not on dependence, but on genuine companionship. The official speeches began punctually. Carmen, elegant in her professional attire, now represented a coalition of legal organizations dedicated to defending the biocultural rights of rural communities. Her experience with Harmony Creek had redirected her career, connecting her legal knowledge with a deeper purpose. True sustainability isn't implemented from the top down, she concluded her presentation. It arises from communities that recover their ancestral knowledge and apply it creatively to contemporary challenges. When it was Esperanza's turn to speak, the sun reached its zenith, bathing the square in golden light. She wore a simple dress decorated with embroidery depicting local plants, a collective creation of the town's women. Her hair, now with more silver strands interwoven among the black ones, framed a face where the lines of worry had been replaced by marks of laughter and determination. 2 years ago, she began, her clear voice reaching the furthest corners of the square without the need for a microphone, we faced the loss of our land, our livelihood, and our community. The drought hadn't just dried up our fields, but our hope as well. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the attentive faces that represented Harmony Creek's transformation. Elders who had shared forgotten knowledge, children growing with a deep connection to their culture, families who had returned after years in the city, attracted by the town's renewed vitality. We then discovered that the real drought wasn't in the sky, but in our minds. We had forgotten how to listen to the earth, how to respect natural cycles, how to work together. This center doesn't just celebrate buildings or techniques, but the awakening of a collective memory that slumbered beneath the surface, waiting to be rediscovered. A group of children, led by Mariana, then walked through the square distributing small packets of special seeds, direct descendants of those that Doña Soledad had given to Esperanza in the darkest days. The speech concluded with a commitment. Harmony Creek would not only preserve traditional knowledge, but would share it generously, recognizing that true security comes not from isolation, but from interdependent communities, connected by bonds of solidarity and shared purpose. The celebration continued until nightfall, with music, traditional dances, and a community banquet where dishes were served made with local ingredients grown using techniques recovered from oblivion. Under the starry sky, Esperanza momentarily moved away from the bustle to contemplate the transformed landscape. From the small hill where her parents were buried, she could see all of Harmony Creek, the green fields where diverse crops grew in harmonious symbiosis, the revitalized river, whose moderate but constant flow irrigated the region, the rejuvenated houses where strengthened families planned futures rooted in their land. Carmen silently joined her contemplation. The sisters stood shoulder to shoulder, without needing words to express their shared amazement at the magnitude of the transformation they had witnessed. "It's only the beginning," Carmen finally commented, pointing towards the lights of neighboring towns where similar changes were beginning to blossom. Esperanza nodded, feeling a deep inner peace. The land she had almost lost now not only sustained her family, but inspired entire communities to rediscover their own roots. The seeds of despair had germinated into fruits of hope that nourished bodies and spirits. As if to confirm this thought, a gentle drizzle began to fall, bringing with it the unmistakable aroma of grateful earth. The drops of water sparkled like diamonds in Esperanza's hair as she returned to the celebration, where her family and community waited to continue weaving the future together, a perfect circle of renewal and continuity. My friends, we've reached the end of the story. Did you enjoy it? What lesson can you take from this story? Leave it here in the comments, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.